I thought it was just another day in my new school, but it became my last day on Earth. I never knew they eat kids. I was a victim. Now my parents are looking for me. I still remember the smell of that morning, the day we moved to the new town. Daddy called it a fresh start, but I didn't really know what we were starting over from. All I knew was that we left everything behind. Our old house, my best friend Kamsi, and even the blue swing Daddy built for me on my 7th birthday. The road was long and bumpy, and the sun followed us like a curious stranger. I sat in the back seat, hugging Mimi, my doll. She was old and had only one eye, but she was my favorite because she never laughed at me. Her soft cloth body still smelled like the rose soap Mummy used when she washed her last week. When we got to the town, the air felt heavy, like it was full of secrets. The streets were too quiet. No playing children. No street hawkers shouting gala, pure water. Just the sound of our car and the wind brushing the trees. Daddy said the town was peaceful, but to me, it felt lonely. The house was nice, though, a big one with green windows and a compound wide enough for me to skip and play. There was a mango tree at the far end, tall and strong, with branches that spread like arms trying to hug the sky. Daddy said it would be perfect for swings. I was happy again, until I saw the woman. She was standing by the fence of the next compound, old, tall, with a wrapper tied carelessly around her waist. Her eyes were strange, like they were looking through me, not at me. When Mummy smiled and said, "Good afternoon, Ma," the woman didn't smile back. She just said quietly, "Don't let her go to that school." Then she shut her gate before Mummy could ask which school. Daddy laughed it off. "Village people and their superstitions," he said, waving his hand. But Mummy didn't laugh. Her fingers tightened around mine, and she said softly, "Maybe she meant another school." That evening, while Daddy unpacked boxes, Mummy made jollof rice. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet, and for a while, everything felt normal again. We ate together in the small dining room with the yellow bulb swinging above us. Daddy talked about his new office, Mummy talked about church, and I told them how I couldn't wait to start school. Bright Future Academy. That was the name. Daddy said it sounded beautiful, a place for smart children, he called it. Mummy smiled and said she would pack my lunch herself. I went to bed early that night. But sleep didn't come. The house made strange noises, creak, tap, creak, like footsteps tiptoeing across the ceiling. At first, I thought it was Daddy checking the rooms, but when I listened closer, I realized it sounded more like bare feet. Then came the whispering. Soft, low, like someone talking through water. I hid under my blanket, clutching Mimi tight. "Mimi, are you awake?" I whispered. Her one eye glinted in the dim light. And then, or maybe I imagined it, I heard her voice. "Don't go." I threw off the blanket, heart beating fast. The moonlight shone through the window, bright enough for me to see shadows moving on the wall. I crawled to the window and peeked out. Someone, or something, was standing near the mango tree. Tall, still, watching the house. Its head turned slowly toward my window, and before I could scream, it disappeared, swallowed by the night. I didn't sleep again till morning. But I told no one. Because even then, I didn't want them to think I was scared. And because a small, strange part of me thought maybe, the shadow was waiting for me. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the light seeped through my curtains, painting my room in soft gold. I hugged Mimi tight, feeling the familiar softness of her cloth body and the smooth curve of her one real eye. Her missing eye didn't bother me. If anything, it made her special, my secret friend who never judged me, who never laughed when I made mistakes. "Wake up, Ada," Mummy's voice floated from the doorway. "Your first day at Bright Future Academy, the big school." I sat up quickly, excitement making my heart thump. Today felt like an adventure waiting to start. My stomach fluttered, and I could barely wait to see the classrooms, meet the teachers, and wear my new uniform. I jumped out of bed and ran to the kitchen. The smell of fried eggs and warm bread wrapped around me like a hug. Mummy was humming softly, humming that same song she always sang when she was happy. I loved hearing it. It made the morning feel gentle and safe. "Good morning, Ada baby," Mummy said as she placed a plate of eggs and bread in front of me. Her smile was warm, but I noticed her eyes were tired. Puffy, almost worried. I frowned but didn't ask. Daddy came into the kitchen, his shirt untucked and tie loose. He ruffled my hair and grinned. "Look at our little scholar," he said. "Big school today. Go show them how clever you are." I giggled and sat down, hugging Mimi close as I ate. "Don't worry, Mimi," I whispered. "I'll be back soon. I'll tell you everything." Mimi didn't answer, of course. She never did. And I didn't expect her to. That was why I loved her. She was mine, safe. After breakfast, Mummy braided my hair carefully, her fingers moving like they had done 1,000 times before. Each plait was neat, and when she finished, my hair felt smooth and soft. I watched her hands and felt a warm, happy feeling in my chest. For a moment, the worries I didn't understand, the whispers outside, the old woman next door, seemed far away. Daddy checked my school bag, books, pencils, water bottle, and my lunchbox. "All ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said, but I hugged Mimi a little tighter, feeling a small, odd shiver in my stomach. Something about this morning felt strange, though I couldn't tell why. We stepped outside. The air smelled fresh, like wet soil after rain. Birds chirped in the trees, children ran along the streets, and motorbikes zoomed past. Everything seemed normal, but then I noticed her. The old woman next door. She stood at her gate, leaning on a broom, staring at me. Her eyes were sharp, too deep for her wrinkled face. "Don't let her go to that school," she whispered. Daddy waved politely. "Thank you for the advice, Ma," he said. Mummy frowned. "That woman worries me," she said softly. Daddy shrugged. "Village superstitions, ignore her." I didn't ignore her. I looked back as our car drove off. She made the sign of the cross and spat 3 times on the ground. My stomach twisted in a funny way, like a warning I didn't understand. The drive to Bright Future Academy was short but felt longer than it should. The closer we got, the quieter the air became. Buildings grew older, streets narrower. The breeze carried a faint, metallic smell I couldn't name. When we arrived at the school, my jaw almost dropped. The compound was huge. Flower beds lined the paved paths. The classrooms were painted soft blue and white, bright and neat. I ran ahead, eager to explore. The teachers smiled at me too perfectly, like they were trying too hard. Their eyes were sharp, almost cold. One teacher held a stack of notebooks so high that I worried they might fall. A girl my age stood nearby, watching me with serious eyes. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Ngozi. Don't eat the lunch, trust me." I laughed, thinking she was joking. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll be fine." But something in her tone made me pause. I hugged Mimi tightly to my chest, feeling a small tug of unease I couldn't name. Daddy knelt down and kissed my cheek. "I'll pick you up early, Ada, I promise," he said. Mummy squeezed my hand. "Be careful, my baby, and be kind," she said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes betrayed something else, worry, fear, maybe even a premonition. I waved as they drove off, a small thrill in my chest. This was my adventure, my big first day. I was ready. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, something waiting. And every time I glanced at Mimi, hugging her tight, I felt small and unprotected, like a tiny bird in a storm. I didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. Weeks of mornings just like this would follow. Weeks where the school would seem normal, then strange. Weeks where whispers in the hallways would make me pause. Weeks where the teachers' smiles were too wide and too cold. The shadows were already waiting. And I didn't know it yet. Everything seemed perfect at first. Bright Future Academy was exactly how I had imagined, big, clean, and full of colors. The classrooms smelled faintly of chalk and polish, and the windows were wide, letting sunlight spill in like warm liquid gold. The floors were shiny, so clean that my shoes made a soft clicking sound whenever I walked. The first day wasn't scary at all. The teachers were polite, giving gentle instructions, showing us where to sit, where to line up, and where the toilets were. My classmates smiled at me. Some whispered, "New girl." Others just stared, curious but friendly. I made friends quickly. Ngozi, the girl who had warned me about the lunch, stayed close. She didn't say much, but she was kind, and I liked that. Other children shared their snacks with me, invited me to play after class, and laughed at the same jokes I liked. At recess, the playground was a paradise. There were swings, a small slide, and a tree house in the corner. The air smelled of grass and sunshine, and for the first time since we moved, I felt truly happy. Mimi stayed in my bag, watching silently. Sometimes I would glance at her one good eye and smile. She didn't say anything, of course, she never did, but holding her made me feel brave. The second day was also perfect. Teachers taught lessons about reading, numbers, and songs. I learned quickly, and they praised me, which made me puff up with pride. I showed Ngozi my notebook full of neat handwriting, and she smiled, a small secret smile just for me. But even in those early days, I started noticing little things. The older students weren't like the younger ones. They rarely laughed. They moved silently in the hallways, their eyes sharp and calculating. Sometimes they disappeared into classrooms that weren't ours, and no one seemed to notice. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe it was just school life. The teachers were strange too, though I didn't understand it yet. One teacher, the one who taught mathematics, always smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. When she looked at me, it felt like she was studying me, measuring me, thinking something I didn't want to know. Another teacher, the music teacher, had a soft voice, but always seemed to appear behind me when I turned my back. I told myself I was imagining it. By the third day, everything was still perfect on the surface. I had my routine down: get to class on time, listen carefully, eat my lunch quietly, play at recess. But that day, I noticed something else. The school cafeteria smelled strange. It didn't smell bad exactly, just metallic. I wrinkled my nose. Ngozi, who sat across from me, didn't touch her food. "Are you okay?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just eat slowly," she said. "Some people do like when you watch them eat." I laughed nervously and took a small bite of my food. It tasted odd but not terrible. My stomach fluttered a little. I pushed the feeling away. Maybe I was just nervous. That night, as I went to sleep, I hugged Mimi tight. Her one eye caught the moonlight, staring at me like it was waiting for something. "It's just the first week," I told myself. "Everything will be fine." The fourth and fifth days were exactly the same. Perfect lessons, kind smiles, the playground echoing with laughter. I started to feel comfortable. The teachers seemed normal now. The school felt like a second home. But sometimes, I caught glimpses of shadows moving where they shouldn't be. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I saw older students staring at nothing, whispering softly in voices too quiet for me to hear. I asked Ngozi about it one day. "Why do they look at nothing?" I whispered as we walked to class. She shrugged. "You don't want to know," she said. I didn't press her. By the end of the first week, I was proud of myself. I had learned new things, made friends, and even recited a poem in front of the class. Daddy would have been proud. Mummy, too. I imagined telling them everything when they came to pick me up. That night, I hugged Mimi tight in bed. The shadows outside my window were longer than usual. The breeze rustled the mango tree, and I thought I saw one branch move all by itself. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind, just imagination. Everything seemed perfect. But shadows don't show themselves all at once. Sometimes they wait. And in the quiet corners of Bright Future Academy, something was already waiting for me. Weeks passed quickly. Bright Future Academy became a rhythm in my life. I woke up early, hugged Mimi tight, and ran down the steps of our new house to the car. Each morning, Daddy or Mummy would walk me to the gate, smiling, waving, wishing me a good day. And each morning, I would wave back, thinking school was just perfect. Everything seemed so ordinary. Lessons, games, friends, and the playground were just like they had been the first week. I learned new poems, solved harder sums, and even joined the drawing club. Ngozi stayed by my side, and I made a few other friends who shared their lunches with me and laughed at my jokes. On the outside, life at school was exactly what it should be for an 8-year-old girl. But sometimes, little things would make me pause. The older students still moved silently, almost like shadows. I often saw them standing in corners, watching the younger ones, their faces blank. It never scared me, not yet. I told myself they were just serious students. Some of the teachers smiled too much. The mathematics teacher, who had seemed kind in the first week, sometimes watched me in a way that made my stomach flutter. Not bad, exactly, just strange. I could never tell if I was imagining it. Occasionally, in the hallways, I thought I heard footsteps that didn't match the movement of anyone around me, or whispers too soft to understand. But every time I looked, everything seemed perfectly normal. Mimi remained my comfort. I carried her everywhere, sometimes hiding her in my bag when I felt I needed to look more grown-up. Sometimes, at night, I would set her on the table near my bed and imagine her staring at the window. I told myself it was just the moonlight making her one eye glint. "Everything is fine," I whispered to her. "School is fine, nothing bad is happening." And for the most part, it was. The routines at school made everything feel safe. I learned to find my own classroom without help, discovered the secret corners of the playground where my friends liked to hide during games, and even figured out which teachers were the nicest for asking questions. One Friday, we had a small celebration for birthdays in class. There were cupcakes and juice, and I laughed with the others as Ngozi whispered to me, "See, nothing's wrong here." And she was right. Nothing was wrong, not yet. Even when I saw the old groundskeeper sweeping a strange, quiet courtyard by himself, or when a window was left open late in the afternoon with no one inside, nothing bad happened. Everything seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary. Yet little moments made me uneasy. A shadow moving slightly at the edge of my vision. A strange smell in the hallways, faint, like metal mixed with something sweet. The metallic tang of the water fountain sometimes made me wrinkle my nose. I told myself it was nothing. "I'm just imagining it," I said to Mimi as I hugged her at night. "Everything is fine. Everything is normal." And in those days, it truly seemed normal. The teachers smiled. The playground was filled with laughter. My parents called me every evening, asking about my day, and I told them about poems, new friends, and games. On the outside, life at Bright Future Academy was perfect. Inside, I couldn't shake a tiny feeling that something was waiting. Not now, but later. Waiting for the moment everything would change. The weeks at Bright Future Academy continued like clockwork. I woke up every morning with the sun painting the sky in soft pink and gold, hugged Mimi tightly, and ran down the steps to the car. Daddy or Mummy would see me off at the gate, their smiles warm, their hands squeezing mine. "Have a good day, Ada," Mummy would say. "Be careful and be kind." "I will," I would reply, my voice bright, though a small flutter of unease sometimes lingered in my chest. Everything seemed ordinary. My friends laughed, the teachers smiled, and the classroom smelled of chalk and polished wood. The playground echoed with happy voices, and even the older students, though serious, kept to themselves. Yet, for the first time, I started noticing things that didn't quite fit. It was on a Tuesday when it began. We were in the classroom, learning about numbers, when I noticed the mathematics teacher standing closer than usual. She wasn't speaking to me, not yet, but her eyes seemed to follow every movement I made. When I raised my hand to answer a question, her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. I felt a small shiver, though the lesson continued normally. At recess, Ngozi whispered to me, "Sometimes they watch more than just the lesson." "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged and looked around. "You'll see, you'll know soon enough." I didn't like that answer, but I didn't ask more. There were too many other children running and playing. I decided to focus on the swings. The first slightly strange thing happened with the lunch. I had my food in the cafeteria, a simple sandwich and some juice, when I noticed the older students sitting silently at the corners of the room. They didn't talk, didn't smile, just watched the younger students as we ate. Their silence made the room feel quieter than it should have been. I glanced at Ngozi, who refused to eat her lunch again. "Don't eat too fast," she whispered. "Watch what's happening." I looked around carefully. Everything seemed normal. The food tasted fine, the juice was sweet, and the cafeteria was clean. Nothing bad happened. Not yet. But I felt uneasy, a small knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain. "It's nothing," I whispered to Mimi later that night, hugging her to my chest. "Everything is fine, school is perfect. I'm just imagining things." During the lessons, other small oddities appeared. One afternoon, in the art class, I noticed a window slightly open at the far end of the room. I could see the sunlight glint on the floorboards, but no one was near the window. The breeze fluttered the papers on the tables, and I thought I saw a shadow move across the wall. I told myself it was the sun, or maybe a tree outside. Nothing bad. At home that evening, when Mummy asked about my day, I didn't tell her about the shadow. I only said, "It was fun. We painted flowers and drew houses." Daddy smiled proudly over the phone, and Mummy laughed at the funny story I told about a classmate spilling juice. Everything seemed perfect. Even the playground remained cheerful. On Wednesday, we played tag under the big mango tree in the corner of the field. I could hear the children laughing, shouting, running. The swings creaked as we pushed each other, and the smell of fresh grass filled the air. But sometimes, I would glance around and notice an older student standing near the edge of the playground, watching silently. Sometimes, a teacher would appear out of nowhere, gliding across the field, their smile too wide, their eyes too focused. I told myself it was nothing. Adults watch children all the time. And so I played, laughed, and ran like every other child. By the end of the week, I began noticing little patterns. The older students always seemed to be in the same corners, observing. Some classrooms had doors that were locked, but I would catch a glimpse of shadows moving behind the glass. A faint metallic smell lingered in the halls sometimes, just for a few seconds before disappearing. Nothing dangerous happened. Not yet. Everything was still normal on the surface. But I could feel a tiny, strange pull at the edges of my mind, a whisper of unease that I couldn't explain. "It's nothing," I told Mimi one night. "Everything is fine, the school is normal, I'm safe." And for the most part I was safe, happy, surrounded by friends, lessons, and laughter. Everything seemed perfect. But shadows, I would learn, don't show themselves all at once. And whatever was waiting, it was patient. It was a Wednesday morning, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary. The sun had risen softly over the town, spilling light through my bedroom window. I hugged Mimi tight, feeling the familiar comfort of her soft cloth body. Today, I thought, would be just another normal day at Bright Future Academy. I skipped down the steps, waving at Mummy, who smiled and pressed a small kiss to my forehead. Daddy was already in the car, adjusting his tie, checking the time. "Have a good day, Ada," he said. "I'll pick you up early." "I will," I called back, climbing into the car with my bag snug on my shoulder. Mimi was tucked safely inside. Everything seemed perfect. School, at first, seemed the same as always. The classrooms smelled clean and warm, the teachers smiled and praised our work, and my friends laughed and shared stories. I sat beside Ngozi during lessons, and we whispered small jokes back and forth. Even the older students were quiet and distant, as usual. Nothing alarming, nothing unusual. Until lunchtime. I carried my food to the cafeteria as usual, a small sandwich, a piece of fruit, and a cup of juice. The room was bright and filled with the sound of children chatting and plates clattering. Everything seemed normal. But then I noticed it. At the far end of the room, an older student, tall, pale, and wearing a perfectly pressed uniform, was staring directly at me. Not looking casually, not like adults watching children. Really staring. I froze for a moment, my hand on the sandwich. My stomach fluttered. I didn't understand why, but I felt watched. Ngozi noticed my pause. Don't look, she whispered, nudging me. Just eat. Don't let them see you notice. I nodded, though my heart was beating fast. I took a small bite, trying to act normal. The student didn't move, didn't blink. Their eyes followed every small motion I made. For a few moments, it felt like time had slowed, like the whole cafeteria had become a stage and I was the only performer. Nothing happened. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that day, during art class, I noticed another oddity. The art teacher, who usually had a warm, soft voice, lingered too long by my desk. She didn't speak, didn't correct my work, just looked at my painting of a small house with a bright red roof. Her eyes were fixed, studying each stroke. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It's nothing, I whispered to Mimi when I got home. Everything is fine, they're just noticing my work. Mimi didn't answer, of course. She never did, and I loved her for it. That evening, on the walk home from school, I began to notice small things that didn't add up. The school grounds seemed quieter than usual, even as the car drove past. The playground, where children had laughed all week, now seemed almost empty. A breeze rustled the mango tree, and I could have sworn one of the branches moved, even though there was no wind. I tried to ignore it. When I got home, Mummy asked me about my day. I told her the usual stories: poems I recited, games I played, friends I laughed with. I said nothing about the student who had stared at me or the teacher who lingered too long. Everything is fine, I told Mimi as I hugged her to my chest before bed. School is normal, everything is fine. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I couldn't help but replay lunchtime over and over in my head. Why had that student stared at me like that? Why had the teacher lingered? I didn't know. I only knew that something felt off, even though nothing had gone wrong. Everything still seemed perfect. My parents called me as usual to ask about my day. I told them happy stories. They were proud of me, unaware of the tiny stirrings of unease that had begun to creep into my mind. And for the first time, I understood that the world sometimes holds secrets just beneath the surface, invisible to everyone except those who start to notice the first small cracks. Everything was still normal on the surface. The school was perfect. Friends were kind. Teachers smiled. The playground echoed with laughter. But shadows were already gathering. And the first incident, though small, had opened the door. Waiting, patient, quiet. The week after the first ominous incident passed slowly, yet smoothly. Bright Future Academy remained clean, orderly, and filled with the sounds of laughter and learning. For the most part, it seemed just like it had when I first arrived: polished floors, bright classrooms, and friendly teachers. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something subtle, almost invisible, had begun to thread through my days, little moments that didn't feel right. It began with lunch again. I sat with Ngozi at our usual table, unpacking my sandwich and juice. At first, everything seemed normal. Friends laughed, the teachers walked through the cafeteria, and the sun shone brightly through the windows. Then I noticed it, the metallic tang in the air. Not strong enough to make me sick, just enough to make my stomach flutter. It came and went, as if someone had waved a small hand across the room, leaving a faint, sharp smell behind. "Do you smell that?" I asked Ngozi quietly. She shook her head. "What? I don't smell anything." I nodded, pretending it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. But even as I chewed slowly, I felt tiny, careful glances from the older students. They were scattered around the room, each in their corner, and each seemed to be watching something or someone. I tried to focus on my friends, on the lunch, on Mimi tucked safely inside my bag, but the feeling lingered. Later that day, in science class, another small oddity happened. We were studying plants, drawing their leaves and roots in our notebooks. I was focused, coloring the green leaves carefully, when I noticed the teacher, usually kind and patient, standing silently behind me for far too long. She didn't say anything, didn't touch my work, just stared. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My pencil wobbled in my hand. I looked up quickly and she smiled. A proper smile this time, polite and gentle. Nothing was wrong, but still I felt a tiny twist of unease. "It's just me noticing things too much," I whispered to Mimi as I hugged her later that night. "Everything is fine. I'm safe." By the middle of the week, I noticed other small things around school. A classroom door that should have been closed was slightly ajar, and when I peeked inside, it seemed empty, but a shadow moved at the far end. I blinked, and it was gone. During math lessons, an older student would occasionally appear at the doorway, peeking inside, then vanish without a sound. Sometimes, when I walked past certain halls, I thought I heard whispering, too soft to understand, too fleeting to pinpoint. Nothing overtly wrong happened, nothing anyone else would notice, but my chest would tighten, a little knot of warning that I couldn't ignore. Even the playground, my safe haven, started to feel slightly different. The swings creaked a little too slowly. The slides were always empty when I passed them. Shadows from the trees sometimes seemed to twist strangely, even when the wind was still. I told myself, over and over, "It's nothing. School is normal, everything is fine. Mimi is safe, I'm safe. Nothing bad is happening." And for the most part, it was true. I was safe. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But shadows, I realized, don't announce themselves all at once. They creep in, small and patient, waiting for the moment the cracks in perception are wide enough to slip through. And the first warnings, the small, unusual things I had started noticing, were only the beginning. By the end of the week, I had grown used to the tiny, unsettling details. They were like insects buzzing faintly at the edges of my vision, noticeable but not dangerous. I laughed with my friends, recited poems in class, played on the playground. I told my parents each evening that everything was perfect, that I was happy. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But the subtle warnings were still there, lingering quietly, waiting for the day they would become impossible to ignore. The last week began like any other. Bright Future Academy looked the same. Clean classrooms, polished floors, the familiar smell of chalk and paint, and children laughing on the playground. But for me, the week felt heavier. The small warnings that had been whispers in the back of my mind now pressed at my chest like a stone. Shadows lingered longer, glances from older students were sharper, and some teachers' smiles felt colder than usual. Yet I tried to ignore it. I clung to Mimi, tucked in my bag, and told myself, "Everything is fine. School is normal. Nothing bad will happen." I didn't know how wrong I was. It began on Monday. During lunch, I noticed that some of the older students had gathered near the back of the cafeteria. They were whispering in low voices, glancing at me occasionally. I tried to ignore them, but the metallic smell in the air returned, stronger this time. My stomach twisted. Ngozi, sitting beside me, didn't eat again. She stared silently at her food. I wanted to ask her what was happening, but she only shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. Later that day, in the classroom, I noticed that some of the smaller doors leading to storage rooms were unlocked. Shadows flitted just inside, moving in ways that no student should be able to move. By Wednesday, the tension had escalated. It was a normal afternoon. I was in my classroom, finishing a drawing for art club. The teacher, the one who usually lingered behind me, appeared at the doorway again. She said nothing, just gestured for me to follow her. I thought I was being called for my drawing. I smiled, clutched Mimi, and followed. The hallway was quiet, eerily quiet. My friends' laughter faded behind me, replaced by silence that made the walls feel too close. My small hands gripped Mimi tighter. Then the door at the far end opened. I stepped inside. It was darker than the hallway. The metallic smell was strong here, curling in the air like smoke. I blinked, trying to adjust. And then I realized the room was not just a classroom. It was something else. Everything happened quickly after that. The older students closed the door behind me. The teacher's smile widened unnaturally, though her eyes were cold. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move fast enough. My heart thumped in terror. I hugged Mimi tightly, wishing she could protect me, but dolls don't protect anyone. I screamed, but no one came. The walls seemed to close in. Shadows flickered across the corners, and a cold, sharp feeling stabbed my chest. Then nothing. By the time anyone noticed, I was gone. The school carried on as usual, children laughing, lessons continuing. My parents called in the evening, unaware that their little girl would never walk home again. The world outside continued, normal and perfect, but I was no longer part of it. I didn't know it yet, but that day marked the end of my life and the beginning of my story as a ghost. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the town bathed in shadows. The streets were quiet now, the sounds of children's laughter and school bells replaced by the distant hum of cars and the rustle of leaves in the evening wind. But for Mummy and Daddy, the world had stopped. They had called the school repeatedly, their voices tense, trembling. No one answered the phone after the last ring. Panic had set in like a storm. My parents had driven straight to Bright Future Academy, their hearts pounding, their hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that knuckles whitened. When they arrived, the compound was silent. The school gates loomed like dark sentinels, closed and unwelcoming. The playground was empty, the swings swaying faintly in the breeze as if moved by ghostly hands. Where is she?" Mummy whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible. She clutched her bag tightly, as if holding on to something solid would keep her from falling apart. Daddy didn't answer. He only ran toward the gate, trying to force it open. The metal resisted him at first, then gave way with a squeal that echoed through the empty grounds. Inside the school, every corridor seemed darker than it should be. Shadows clung to the corners, stretched unnaturally across the polished floors. The classrooms were empty, desks neatly aligned, as if no one had been there all day. But the smell lingered. A faint metallic tang in the air made Daddy wrinkle his nose, a subtle warning he didn't understand. "Ajiora," Mummy called, her voice breaking. "Ajiora, where are you?" No answer. They ran from classroom to classroom, checking under tables, opening cupboards, peeking behind doors. Every time, they found nothing. Their little girl, my small hands, my bright laughter, my soft voice, had vanished. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Mummy's hands were raw from opening doors, her hair disheveled, tears streaking her face. Daddy's chest ached, his breathing sharp and uneven. They yelled my name, their voices echoing through the empty halls. Each shout seemed to bounce back at them, mocking, cruel, empty. "Please, please, Ada," Mummy sobbed, collapsing onto the floor of one empty classroom. Her hands covered her face, shaking. "Why isn't she here?" Daddy grabbed her arm, holding her up. "We'll find her," he said, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. "We have to find her." But they didn't know what had happened. They didn't know the shadows that waited quietly, that had taken me without a sound. Outside, the night pressed closer. The streetlights cast long, lonely beams across the empty school compound. Mummy clutched Daddy's hand tightly, as if the warmth could protect her from the cold horror creeping in. They checked the playground again. The swings moved slightly in the breeze, the slides glinting in the moonlight. Every familiar corner, every flower bed, every path they had walked with me now seemed strange, foreign. "Maybe she wandered off," Daddy said, his voice trembling, trying to convince himself as much as Mummy. "Maybe she went outside. Maybe someone took her." Mummy shook her head violently. "No, she wouldn't, she can't. She's my baby." Their cries filled the empty air, but the school offered no answers. No children appeared, no teachers came to explain, only the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional distant sound of a car passing. They even checked the classrooms where the older students sat, where I had seen shadows moving. Every desk was empty, every corridor silent. The metallic smell lingered faintly in the air, like a warning. Mummy fell again, her body shaking, her voice hoarse from calling my name over and over. Daddy sank to the floor beside her, holding her, whispering, "We'll find her. We'll find our Ajiora." But they didn't know that finding me was impossible now. That I had already become part of the shadows themselves, watching, unable to speak, unable to be touched. Hours turned into what felt like an eternity. They ran the compound, checked the garden, the hallways, the classrooms, even the small hidden corners behind the playground. But nothing. Every door they opened, every desk they checked, every corridor they scanned, empty. Silence. The school seemed ordinary, perfect even, but the emptiness screamed louder than any words. And outside, the night deepened. The wind whispered faintly through the trees, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost like my small, desperate voice. Mummy pressed her face into Daddy's shoulder. "She's gone," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Daddy shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, she can't be. Our baby Adjora." And in that very night, the school that had seemed so safe and ordinary during the day revealed itself as a place where shadows moved silently, where laughter turned to silence, and where the tiny, lost cries of a little girl could not reach the ears of those who loved her most. My parents searched and searched, unaware that every corner they checked, every hallway they ran down, every classroom they opened, was already part of the trap that had taken me. And I watched, from the shadows, hugging Mimi, silent, unable to call out. I don't know when I stopped being part of the world of the living. One moment, I was walking down the hallway, my little hands clutching Mimi. The next, I was everywhere and nowhere, my voice gone, my body gone, but my mind still awake. And then I saw them. My parents. Mummy's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her dress was rumpled, her hair tangled. She ran from classroom to classroom, opening doors, checking desks, calling my name. "Adora," she screamed, her voice cracking, echoing through the empty halls. Daddy followed her, his face pale, jaw tight, tears running silently down his cheeks. His hands shook as he searched the classrooms, checked the lockers, looked under tables and chairs, but there was nothing. I wanted to shout, to run to them to tell them I was safe or at least alive, but I couldn't. I was trapped in between, watching, silent. They moved through the school like shadows themselves. Every corner they turned, every step they took, I was there, following unseen. Mummy ran to the playground, checking every swing and slide. "Ada, come on, baby, don't hide from us," she called, but the swings moved only in the wind, mocking her, the slides glinting silently in the moonlight. Daddy checked the hallways, shining his phone's light into every darkened corner. "Where are you, Adjora?" he whispered. His voice broke, and I wanted so badly to tell him I was here, watching. But I could only stay invisible. The school seemed different at night. Shadows stretched across the polished floors, moving strangely, almost alive. The metallic smell, faint during the day, now clung to the walls, curling around the furniture, following my parents like an invisible hand. I floated silently through the corridors, clutching Mimi. Her one eye reflected the dim light of the hall, and I imagined she was watching the search too. But she was just a doll, silent, unable to help anyone. I watched them enter the classrooms where the older students had been sitting, the ones I had seen staring at me. Those seats were empty now, but the air felt heavier, colder. The shadows moved differently, curling and stretching in the corners, as if aware of my parents' presence. Mummy's sobs echoed through the empty halls. "Why won't you come back to us, Adjora? Why?" Daddy shook his head, running a hand through his hair. We'll find you, I promise." But they didn't know. How could they? The school had taken me silently without a trace. Hours passed, though it felt like forever. They moved through every classroom, checked every locker, even opened storage closets I had never seen before. "Check the garden," Mummy cried suddenly. Maybe she ran outside. I followed them as they ran to the small garden behind the school. The flowers glowed faintly in the moonlight. The grass was cool under their shoes. They called my name again and again, but all that reached them was silence. The wind rustled the mango tree in the corner, and I thought I saw a faint shimmer, a shadow moving in a way that wasn't natural. I floated closer, clinging to Mimi, wishing they could see me, wishing they could understand. They returned to the hallways, desperate, exhausted. Mummy's arms trembled as she leaned against a wall, panting. Daddy's face was pale, his lips quivering. "I don't understand," Mummy whispered. How could she just disappear? They couldn't have taken her, Daddy said, but his voice was hollow. No one could take her, not here, not from our baby. And still, I floated silently beside them, invisible, watching, heartbroken that they were searching for me while I could not answer. The school at night had become something else. I could see the faint outlines of the older students' presence, long shadows stretching along the walls, moving silently, curling around corners. The teachers were gone now, but I knew they were watching, somewhere beyond the walls, smiling in ways that made my chest ache. I hugged Mimi tighter, wishing I could warn my parents. But I couldn't. I could only follow them, ghostly, silent, helpless. At one point, Mummy collapsed onto the floor of a classroom, her hands covering her face, shaking with grief. Daddy knelt beside her, holding her, whispering, "We'll find her. We won't leave until we do." I wanted to reach out to let them feel me, to tell them I was still here, still waiting. But I could not. My body had gone. My voice had gone. All I had left was Mimi and the knowledge that they were looking for me, that their love would never stop, even when the world had taken me away. The night stretched on. The wind whispered through the empty halls, rustling papers, moving shadows, and carrying my parents' cries out into the dark streets. I floated behind them, around them, watching as they checked every classroom again, every corridor again, every corner. Every time they called my name, my heart ached. I wanted to scream, to fly to them, to hug them. But I couldn't. The school had claimed me. And my parents, desperate and grieving, could only run from shadow to shadow, calling into the silence, never knowing that I was already here, watching, waiting, unable to return. That night, my parents left the school exhausted, defeated, carrying the weight of fear, confusion, and grief. But they didn't stop searching. They would search every night, every day for me, their little Ajora who had vanished without a trace. And I would follow them. Ghostly, silent, holding Mimi, watching their heartbreak and wishing, oh, how I wished that I could comfort them, that I could come home. Being a ghost was strange. At first, I didn't understand what had happened. One moment, I had been walking down the hallway with Mimi clutched in my tiny hands. The next, the world looked the same, but I felt different. My body was gone. My voice was gone. And yet, my mind, my thoughts, my feelings remained. I could see everything, the classrooms, the hallways, the empty playground, but I could pass through walls as if they were made of mist. I could float above the polished floors and glide silently across the compound. And the strangest part, I could see things that no one else could. Shadows. Long, curling shapes that moved when no one else was looking. Dark shapes hiding behind classroom doors, peeking from windows, hovering over corners of hallways. They were waiting, watching, patient. I drifted through the first floor corridors, holding Mimi tightly. Her one glassy eye caught the dim moonlight filtering through the windows, and I imagined she was watching too. I didn't understand yet why the older students, the teachers, and the shadows had acted the way they did while I was alive. But now, as a ghost, the puzzle began to make sense. I floated past the classrooms where my parents had searched the night before. I could see their footprints faintly pressed into the dusty floorboards, and I felt a sharp twist of sadness in my chest. They had looked for me everywhere, but they had no idea I was here, invisible, following them silently. "Mummy, Daddy," I whispered, though no sound came out. I tried again, harder, my little voice aching inside me. Still nothing. The school felt different at night. Everything was the same, yet somehow more alive. The shadows moved with purpose, curling and twisting, shifting in ways that were impossible during the day. Some of the doors I had seen open slightly, while alive now revealed what had been hidden behind them. I drifted closer to one classroom where the older students had disappeared into corners. Through the walls, I could see faint outlines of other children. They were pale, still, and silent like I had become. Their eyes were wide, their tiny hands clutched at dolls or small toys, and they didn't speak. They had been here long before me. My stomach twisted. I recognized a pattern now. I wasn't the first. I floated to the cafeteria. The long tables were empty, chairs neatly tucked in. but the air smelled of the metallic tang I had noticed while alive, stronger now, curling around my ghostly form. I passed the corners of the room where the older students had stood, and I realized their gazes had not been casual. They weren't watching just the children who ate. They were choosing, selecting. And I had been chosen. The playground was next. I hovered above the swings, remembering how I had laughed here, how the sunlight had warmed my face, how the grass had smelled sweet in the afternoons. Now it was silent. The swings moved slightly in the breeze, casting long, sinister shadows. The slide glinted coldly in the moonlight. I drifted closer to the mango tree at the edge of the playground. There was a faint shimmer in the shadows beneath its branches, the same shimmer I had noticed before I died. It pulsed like something alive. I reached out, passing through it, and felt a cold, sharp sensation pass through me, almost like a warning. "It's waiting," I whispered to Mimi. She didn't answer, she never did. I explored deeper into the school. There were hallways I had never walked as a living child, hallways hidden behind locked doors, staircases that led nowhere, rooms that seemed to stretch farther than they should. And everywhere I could sense the shadows. Silent, watching, moving in ways no living person could. Some of the shadows whispered faintly. I couldn't understand the words, but the feeling was clear. This was their school. They controlled it, and I had been brought here to stay. I passed the classrooms where I had studied, where I had laughed with friends, where teachers had smiled at me. They seemed smaller now, ordinary, fragile. The shadows had overtaken the spaces that had seemed safe. From the windows, I saw my parents again. They had returned the following night, shining flashlights through hallways, checking classrooms, calling my name in desperate, broken voices. I floated silently above them, trying to reach them, trying to show them I was here. Mummy's arms were empty. Daddy's hands shook. Each time they called my name, I tried to answer, but no sound came. All I could do was follow, invisible, helpless, holding Mimi, wishing I could comfort them, wishing I could run to them and tell them I was still here. But I couldn't. The shadows didn't want me to. I drifted back into the classrooms, into the hallways, watching the way the shadows moved. Some of the older students' figures flickered like dark smoke. Some of the teachers' faces appeared in doorways, their smiles too wide, their eyes cold. I realized now that the school was not a safe place, not for children like me, not for anyone. And yet there was beauty in the silence. There was wonder in my new form. I could float, pass through walls, see things I had never noticed before, watch my parents desperately search, and cling to Mimi while discovering secrets no living person could see. I don't know how long I wandered. Hours, days, weeks. Time felt strange here, bending around me like the shadows themselves. I discovered hidden corners of the school, small rooms where other lost children lingered, faint echoes of their laughter long gone, trapped between life and the shadows. And everywhere I went, I could see the pattern. The school fed on children, slowly, quietly, selecting them one by one. I had been chosen, and now I was part of it, invisible, ghostly, watching. From my vantage point, I saw my parents leave the school each night, exhausted, defeated, still searching, still hopping. They did not know what had happened, could not imagine the horrors behind the doors and shadows. I wanted so badly to warn them, to show them, to be with them again. But I couldn't. All I had was Mimi, my small ghostly self, and the knowledge of the truth that would haunt me forever. The school had me now, and it had secrets that no living person should ever see. And I would watch, always. The night was darker than any I had seen before. The moon hung high but dim, as if afraid to shine on bright future academy. The wind whispered faintly through the hallways, carrying strange echoes, almost like laughter, but it was not happy. Not at all. I floated silently through the main corridor, holding Mimi tight. My little hands trembled even though my body no longer existed. Tonight felt different. The shadows were restless. They twisted and writhed along the walls, pooling at the corners of classrooms, flickering like smoke in the dim light. They were awake, fully awake. I drifted into the hall where I had first been taken. The air was thick with that metallic smell, strong now, curling like smoke around the floor. And then I saw them, the other children. They were all there, pale and still, holding onto toys or dolls, eyes wide and empty. Some of them looked at me when I appeared, their expressions frozen in silent terror. Others were already twisted into shadow, half gone, whispers of children trapped between life and the darkness. And then I saw the shadows move differently. They weren't just curling in the corners now. They were alive. They were hungry. They gathered around the children, pulling them into themselves, feeding on their fear, their energy, their very being. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fly into the middle and stop them, but I couldn't. I could only watch, silent, helpless, holding Mimi. Down the hall, I saw my parents again. They had returned, more desperate than ever. Daddy's flashlight shook in his hand, casting frantic beams across the walls. Mummy's face was streaked with tears, her dress torn from running, her hair wild. They called my name over and over, their voices cracking. Adiore, please come back. I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell them, I'm here, I'm still here. But the shadows blocked me. Their black forms rippled across the halls, twisting, stretching, curling around the spaces where my parents walked. Every time I tried to get close, a cold wave pushed me back, almost knocking me through walls. I drifted closer to the classrooms where the shadows fed. I could see the older students who had been alive when I first arrived. Their eyes were hollow now, their bodies pale and ghostly, twisted into the shapes of the shadows themselves. They weren't human anymore. And then, in the far corner of the hall, I saw the heart of it. A doorway that pulsed with darkness, blacker than the shadows around it, thicker, alive. A faint whisper drew me closer, calling me. I knew immediately. This was the place that had taken me. This was where the school fed. I floated through the doorway. Inside, the room was enormous, bigger than it should have been. Walls stretched impossibly high, ceiling lost in darkness. The shadows pooled at the center, writhing like a living thing. And in the middle, I saw it, a figure of darkness, taller than any adult, with eyes that glowed faint red. Its hands reached toward the children, dragging them slowly into its mass, feeding on their fear, their life, their light. I wanted to run. I wanted to protect the other children. But I had no body, no power, no way to intervene. I could only watch. Suddenly, I felt movement behind me. My parents had followed, somehow drawn to the doorway despite the shadows. Mummy screamed when she saw the figure. Daddy tried to push through the shadows, but they were walls of black, twisting and impossible to penetrate. Adaore, Mummy cried, reaching toward the center, her arms outstretched, her face pale with terror. I floated in front of her, trying again, my ghostly self pushing, trying to create a path to protect her. My whispers reached her faintly, just a shadow of sound. I'm here, I'm here. But it wasn't enough. The darkness surged, pushing them back. Daddy fell to the floor, Mummy's hand barely brushing the edges of the shadows. And I realized the school did not care about parents, about love, about hope. Only the children mattered. Only the shadows mattered. I turned toward the other children. Some had been pulled completely into the black mass. Others clung to toys or dolls, terrified. I saw their faces, small, innocent, frozen in fear. I floated among them, invisible, powerless, trying to reassure them with my presence. Don't be afraid, I whispered silently. I'm here with you, I'm here. Some of them felt it. Some stopped trembling, looking at me with wide, frightened eyes. They understood, even if just a little. And then I made the decision. I couldn't save them all. I couldn't stop the shadows. But maybe I could save the memory of what happened. Maybe I could make sure my parents knew the truth. I flew to the doorway, brushing against the edge of the blackness. I focused every bit of my will, every ounce of my ghostly strength on leaving a trace. A whisper, a flicker, a memory that would reach the living. Mummy and Daddy watched, helpless, as the shadows pulled more children into the black mass. I reached toward them, whispering, leaving a faint mark of my presence. A single pulse of light on the wall, a small warmth in the air, a flutter in the leaves outside the window. Something that said, I am here. I am Adiora, remember me. And then, slowly, the darkness retreated. Not gone, not destroyed, just patient. Waiting. I watched the shadows curl back into the corners, the black mass shrinking. The doorway pulsed faintly, almost calmly, as if it had been interrupted but not defeated. I floated outside the room, above the hallway. My parents had not reached me. The other children had not been saved. But my mark remained. My presence remained. Mummy and Daddy sank to the floor, exhausted, defeated, weeping. I floated above them, invisible, trying to comfort them silently. They didn't see me, but they felt something, a whisper of hope, a flicker of light, a sense that I was still here, watching, loving them. I realized then that the school would never truly be defeated. The shadows would wait, patient and hungry, for more children. But I would stay too. I would watch. I would remember. I would leave signs, tiny breadcrumbs of hope and truth for anyone who came after. And even if I could never touch my parents again, even if I could never truly be with them, I would always remain. Silent, ghostly, holding Mimi, watching, waiting. The school had claimed me, but it had not claimed my memory. My light remained, and I would not let it be forgotten. I watched from above as my parents left the school that night. Their small figures grew smaller and smaller, swallowed by the darkness outside the gates. Mummy's sobs carried on the wind, and Daddy's hands shook as he held her close. I wanted to run to them, to throw myself into their arms, but I could not. My body was gone. My voice was gone. Only my mind and my heart remained. I floated silently, clutching Mimi, my little doll that had been my comfort in life and in death. The shadows that had claimed me and the other children lingered still, curling in corners, whispering softly. They were patient, waiting for the next. I could not stop them. I had learned that now. But I could watch. I could follow my parents without being seen. I could leave whispers, small signs that only they might notice. I hovered behind them as they walked home, their heads bowed in sorrow, their hands still clutching each other. Sometimes, when Mummy paused to cry, I blew a faint, cold draft across her shoulder. It made her shiver, and she looked around, hoping anyone had noticed her pain. I couldn't reach her fully, couldn't hug her or kiss her cheek. All I could do was be near, invisible, a presence that was gentle and small, like the pulse of the wind. At home, I followed them into their small kitchen. I watched Mummy set a plate for me at dinner, my favorite meal, though I would never eat it again. She sighed, looking at the empty chair, the empty plate, tears sliding down her face. I hovered above the table, pushing the fork ever so slightly, making it slide. Just a small movement, a small sign that I was here. Mummy gasped. "Ajora," she whispered. Her eyes darted around the room. Daddy looked too, but neither of them could see me. I wished I could tell them, "Yes, it's me. I'm here. I'm safe. I'm still with you." But only a faint warmth brushed the room, and they could feel it, even if they could not understand. Over the next days, I learned how to leave more signs, a flicker of light in the hallway. A toy moved ever so slightly, a soft giggle at the edge of hearing. Each sign was small, but it comforted them. I could not save myself from the school. I could not bring back the other children, but I could let my parents know I was near. I followed them as they searched, even after leaving the school. Their hope never died, and that gave me strength. Each night, they returned to the gates, shining their flashlights, calling my name, and I floated above them, whispering in ways only a ghost could, leaving them hints of my presence. Sometimes I drifted back into the school. The shadows were always there, silent, patient, hungry. I passed the older students who had been claimed, now part of the darkness, and I whispered to them softly, "You are not forgotten." They did not answer, but perhaps they heard. Perhaps they remembered the warmth of life, if only for a moment. The school remained dangerous. It would take more children, it would wait for them. But I stayed too, watching, protecting, remembering. And sometimes my parents noticed small things, a light flickering in the empty hall, a cold breeze passing across a room. Mimi moved from the place they had left her. They could not explain it, but their hearts recognized it. Their little girl was still here, always. And I was. I learned that even though I could not touch, I could be there. Even though they could not see me, they could feel me. Even though the shadows had taken me from life, they could not take me from love. I floated to the window one night, looking out at the dark, silent school. The shadows twisted inside, waiting. I hugged Mimi. I cannot save them all, I whispered. But I will not forget, I will watch, I will protect, and I will remain. The wind carried my whisper beyond the walls, beyond the gates, to the world of the living. My parents, far away, paused and felt a strange warmth. They didn't understand. They didn't know I was there. But they felt it, a faint pulse of hope, like the heartbeat of a child who would never truly leave. And I, Ajora, the little girl who had been taken, the little girl who now floated between worlds, smiled. I was gone from their arms, but not from their hearts. I was a ghost. I was a whisper. I was a memory that would never fade. The shadows remained, the school waited, and yet I was here. Always. Even though I had learned to live between the worlds, the school remained a place of darkness. Its walls held secrets that no living person should ever see. By day, it seemed normal, bright, and cheerful, with children laughing, teachers smiling, and parents unaware. But by night, the true nature of Bright Future Academy revealed itself. The shadows never slept. They waited in corners, stretched along hallways, twisted over staircases. Sometimes I could feel them stir even in the classrooms where no one had been for years. I drifted past the cafeteria, and the faint metallic smell still lingered, curling through the air like smoke. It whispered promises of fear and hunger. The other children who had been taken were not entirely gone. Their eyes, faint glimmers in the shadows, sometimes appeared at the windows. Sometimes I could hear them, whispering faintly, calling for help, voices soft and chilling. They had been claimed by the darkness, but their presence lingered, like a memory that refused to fade. The older students I had once seen, twisted into shadow themselves, wandered silently through the hallways, half human, half darkness. They watched, waiting, selecting. And sometimes, in the faint flicker of moonlight, I could see their eyes glowing faint red, unblinking, cold, following anyone who came too close. Even my parents, far away, could not escape the sense of the school. The wind carried whispers, the leaves rustled strangely, and the night air felt heavy, as though something unseen pressed close. I tried to protect them, to leave hints of comfort, but the horror of Bright Future Academy never fully left. I floated above the empty classrooms, hugging Mimi, and I realized the truth. The school would wait. It would hunger. It would claim again. And no one would know unless a ghost like me remained, watching, remembering, whispering, warning. The light of the living world was fragile. The shadows were patient. And the horror would always linger. At the end of each video, always put, "Thanks for watching, kindly like, share with friends, and subscribe for more amazing stories."